Okay, folks, this will be a quick ditty about water changes. There used to be a website called reefs.org, reefs.org, and you'll have to deal with my pronunciation. I've only got about the 9 teeth left, so S's, TH's, and F's sound a little bit alike. Deal with it. reefs.org. It's no longer around. I think they're accessible in the Wayback Machine. And they used to have a great library section on that website. And there was an article by a guy named Troy Brightbill, I'll never forget his name, who did a rather eye-opening and informative piece about the mathematics of percentage water changes. Okay? And he posed the question like this. If you had material X in your system, let's say a 10-gallon tank, and you had 50 parts per million, okay, how many water changes at 50% would it take to reduce the water change, that 50 parts per million by 50% versus a 10% water change? How many 10% water changes would it take to reduce a substance in a 10-gallon tank by 50% versus 150% water change? Obviously, a 50% water change will reduce the concentration of anything you have in that volume by 50% immediately, because you've changed out 50% of the volume of the system. Pure and simple logic, right? We'll assume that the water is distilled pure water, just for shits and giggles. Okay. Now do the same thing, 10%. The first time you made a 10% water change, you're left with 90% of that material, right? Do another 10% water change. You're now left with 81%, not 80%. The second 10% water change did not remove as much of the material as the first 10% water change did, because the first 10% water change left you with 90%, and 10% of 90 is 9, not 10. So we go from 100% before the water change to 90% at the first water change to 81% at the next water change, to then only 10% of 81 removed. And you then see that it takes a lot more than you would think. Maybe 10% water changes would equal 50% reduction. It doesn't work that way. It's closer to 9 to 10 water changes at 10% to remove a pollutant down by half of its original amount in the volume of your system. Keep that in mind. If you do a water change of 90%, okay, you instantly remove 90% of all pollutants in your system or any other undesirable element in your system. And if your water is matched, temperature and pH in fresh water, mineral content also helps too. You don't want to change, go from a regularly mineralized tap water, let's say sourced aquarium, and immediately do a 90% water change with reverse osmosis water that has not been reconstituted. That can be bad for your fish and your animals. Okay? Don't do that. But if you keep the major parameters the same, okay, pH and temperature, and you don't whack the mineral content too much, okay, everything will be fine. I used to have a 75-gallon acrylic reef tank when I was living in Massachusetts and working in the area of the North Shore of Boston. I bought the aquarium from a manager of the store I worked at. It was an acrylic lowboy, 18 front to back, 18 inches high, and 5 feet long. My favorite tank of all time. I had Bo Gregory damselfish spawning weekly in that tank, and the male was guarding 2 to 3 clutches of eggs at any given time. It was an amazing tank. You could not see the substrate at night That's how many bugs and critters, amphipods, bristleworms, what have you, were moving about on the sand and gravel mix. Plankton blooms every night. The thing was powered by 4 VHO actinics and 3 high pressure sodium halide bulbs, and it was only 18 inches tall. Okay, I had a colt coral in there that was well over 18 inches tall. 6 stalks, each of which was about 1.5 inches thick. I grew so much soft coral out of that tank, it paid for itself. It was an amazing tank, and I gave it water changes where I had a play coral that was about 6 inches across, and I brought the water level of fungia, a large fungia, long tentacle fungia, and I brought the water level down to the height of that coral, which was about an inch and a quarter off of the substrate. My leather coral, my elegance coral, my nephias, the colt, all of my other corals, anemones, rock anemones, were all exposed to air and just hanging in air, drooping over or whatever for at least 20 minutes, a half hour. Occasionally I'd splash some water here and there if I got really nervous. Never had an issue. I've done that with all my tanks, freshwater and saltwater. Huge water changes. As long as your major parameters are matched and you're not going to shock your system or your animals in any major way, there is no problem. It is better to do a 90% water change once a month than it is to do 250% water changes once a month, spaced 2 weeks apart. Okay, you will actually get rid of more waste by doing one 90% water change once a month than you will doing 250% water changes twice a month, assuming your waste input, your food, etc. and so forth, remains constant and the same every day in both scenarios. Okay, that's just the mathematics. That's not a subject that's even open to argument. It's not a matter of opinion, is what I'm trying to tell you, okay? And that a snail creates more phosphate in its poop and its day-to-day, second-to-second living machinations than it does eating via the algae it consumes in your tank. That's a point of fact. That is not my opinion. I am not presenting to you my opinion about cleanup crews. It is a matter of fact that all of these animals generate the waste that fuels the very things that grow that you're putting them in your system to remove in the first place. I cannot think of a more insane proposition if that's the reason why you're getting these animals. There is absolutely no reason for anyone on the face of this planet to go buy an animal they do not enjoy for the utilitarian goal of controlling algae. There are smarter, cheaper ways to do it, and you won't have an animal you don't want take up biological space in your system of an animal that you do want. Okay? If you like the animals, if you're into nerites because they look funky, and they do, that's great. I kept Ancestris because I happen to really like bushy-nosed Ancestris. I had a breeding pair of albino veiltails that were stunning. And I've had autocats, and I've had farlowellas, and I've had henny Ancestris, the little dwarf, what they call clown plecos. I love them. They're the most industrial cleaners of a tank. I had about 15 in a 120, and they kept the tank fairly clean and mostly spotless. And I've kept Panax. They're not so much a cleaner. All the sucker mouths, all of those cherry shrimp. I used to supply the entire sales office of Marine Depot when it was in existence with cherry shrimp from my little 12-gallon Beaufront freshwater nano that I had on my desk when I worked there as a customer service representative on the phones for about 2 years, sometime back, probably around 2005-ish, I want to say. So I'm familiar with all these quote-unquote cleanup crew animals. I've sold them to customers. Okay, I've kept them as a hobbyist. I've imported them as a wholesaler's employee. I've, filled out the order forms, placed the order for the wholesalers. Then I sold them to stores over the phone, took orders. I even cold call salt water back in the day, various stores. So I've been around, and I know of what I speak. There is something to be said for buying these animals because you're interested. You find their cleaning behavior enjoyable, and they do help you to optically keep the aquarium a little bit more tidy. But do not be fooled, or do not be fooled into thinking, and do not think for a moment that these animals are actually cleaning your system. They're improving the visual appearance of your system temporarily. They are doing nothing to keep your system actually cleaner. Given enough time, the algae will pop back in other spots, and then you're going to have to go buy cleaners for that spot, and then it'll come back heavier in another spot, and then your fish will start to mysteriously die one by one as the waste products that are building up escape your attention. Okay, or they'll get faded out in color, or their growth rate will slow as the organics in the water column increase in a general level way. Okay, pay attention to all this stuff, folks. It will save you a lot of effort, time, and money going down the road, especially if you're new to the hobby. Okay? Try to get a hold of that article. It might be on reefs.com. I think a lot of some of the original owners started that website. I know some of the old threads that I used to participate in back in the day are on that site. I haven't done a lot of digging there. I don't really do a lot of internet silliness with the aquarium hobby any longer. I did these two videos because YouTube's algorithm fed me a nice video that the pleasant YouTuber made about her opinions about cleanup crews. I don't deal as much in opinions. I've been there, done that. I've spent hours and pages of typing on internet threads arguing the arguments. I'm done with that. I'm just going to give you some cold hard facts. All animals poop. All poop helps to feed algae. Adding animals that poop to help try to control algae is like trying to put out a fire with frickin' gasoline. It doesn't work. You get the impression that it does at the beginning, but it really doesn't. And it can cause a whole host of other problems to boot. If you enjoy these critters, you want to keep them as part of your system, by all means do so, and then take into account the extra bio load and water change or chemical media or whatever you do, plants, removing, doing something to process the waste, increase that accordingly based on the increase in your biomass and bio load. That's all I'm saying. But do not suffer under the illusion for a moment, or cause anyone else to suffer under the illusion for a moment that there is such a thing as a cleanup crew and that they clean up any damn thing, because they don't. Okay? The only thing they can do in this particular universe is add to the load of your system. Okay? There are cleanup crews, but they're not the cleanup crews that you think. Okay? Sponges, feather duster worms, corals in certain circumstances, anemones, anything that really uses plants or algal cells in their tissues. Plants are really true cleanup crews. Those are cleanup crews. Animals, feather dusters, I'm not sure, depending upon how much they filter versus how much they poop. Okay? But animals are not cleanup crews. It just doesn't work that way. And that's the end of that.